Hi, my name's Steve. I'm here to give you an introduction to Kanban. So what is Kanban? Well, it's a visual tool to help us manage work, to help us to improve efficiency. And we can use it in so many different arenas, from software development all the way through to manufacturing, and indeed anywhere in between. Now, when we think about the origins of Kanban, it's from the Far East. Toyota, the people that make us the motor vehicles, back in the late 1940s, the early 1950s, they had this thing called the Toyota Production System, often abbreviated to TPS. Now, the Toyota Production System is basically considered to be the foundation of lean thinking, which in turn was the underpinnings of agility. So what we find from Kanban is that we have elements of both within it. So it gives us all the great stuff that we have from the world of lean. We think about continuous improvement. We think about flow efficiency. We think about visual management. And of course, really key to lean is this idea of reducing waste. We've obviously got the elements of agility as well. And when we think about agility, we're thinking about flexibility. We're thinking about incremental delivery. We're thinking about collaboration. We're thinking about focus on delivery. So in Kanban, we have the best of both worlds. Kanban itself, as a word, it's a Japanese word that broadly translates as billboard, as sign, as a signal. This is Kanban. Now, there's a number of Kanban values, things that are at the heart of Kanban. Whole bunch of different values. The first of these values is this idea of transparency. Being able to very, very clearly see things. Openness about information. Sharing information. But being really open, honest and transparent with things. One of the other key values that we've got to think about is this idea of balance. We talk about balance. Balance of views, balance of systems, and particularly balance of capability. We've got to think about that supply-demand conundrum. In addition to these first two, at the heart of what we're doing is this idea of collaboration. People working well together. People communicating with each other. It's this idea of a really collaborative team effort. This is one of our key values. Another value at the heart of Kanban. Focus. To be really focused with what we're doing. And when we talk about focus, the focus is on the customer. Okay? Really focusing on the goal for the system. Thinking about end result, end outcome. It's got to be everything driven towards the customer. So customer focus is key. Also at the heart of these values, flow. I will talk to you more about flow a little bit later. But flow is fundamentally realizing that work, it's a flow of value. And importantly, a flow of value to our customers. Another of our key values, leadership. We've got people leading, pointing the way. And importantly, we need leadership at all levels within the organization. But the ability to motivate people, the ability to inspire people to take action. This is what leadership is all about. we've also got to think, importantly, about understanding these little light bulb moments that are key for any organisation. The ability to understand the environment in which we're working, the processes that are being used. And all of this enables us to make better decisions about stuff, to be able to improve stuff, particularly from the point of view of the customer. Another key value, this idea of agreement. And when we talk about agreement, it's basically this commitment, this drive to work together towards an end goal. We agree to move collectively, collaboratively, for the sake of the customer, the best interests of the customer. The final value that we've got to think about, and I'm deliberately going to write this one down. I'm not going to use an image. I want to use a word. And that word is respect. For me, the key value when we're thinking of Kanban, it's respect for others, for other considerations. So for me, respect holds all those other values up. Now, when we think about these values collectively, these values for me, they basically embody the motivation of Kanban to improve service delivery, basically through collaborating teams. So in addition to these values, we've also got 6 principles that form part of the embodiment of Kanban. 3 of these specifically relate to the field of change management. So we've got 3 principles that are helping with this very important issue of change management. The first of these is fundamentally telling us to start with where we are. Start here. Start with what you do now. Now, starting with literally where you are now is important for a couple of key reasons. First of all, it will minimize resistance to change. Often people resist being changed. So if we're literally starting with where we are now, we start with the here and now, we're hopefully going to minimize that resistance. Equally, starting with where we are, it will mean that we begin to highlight any current inefficiencies in our system. Equally, it'll show us where we're currently doing things well. Start here, really important. Second of our change management principles is this idea that we will agree to evolve. Now, Kanban as an approach from a change management perspective, with any change, it's important that we get people to buy into the change. Buy-in is essential. And besides people buying into what we're doing, let's ensure that the change is perhaps a little bit more gradual. So Kanban is all about gradual, evolutionary change. So we're talking evolution rather than revolution. Really important. The third of our change management principles, we've got to have leadership. We've talked about leadership as part of the values, but importantly, we need to have leadership at all levels of the organisation. If change, we're talking about change here, if change is going to be effective, people need to feel empowered to be able to enact the change. And this is what we mean by this idea of leaders. And we need leaders, importantly, at all levels of the organisation. So those are our 3 change management principles. There's 3 further principles that relate to service delivery. So service delivery. We've talked about the importance of focus on the customer, haven't we? So the first of our service delivery principles is nothing more radical than this idea of putting the customer first, okay? So the customer needs, expectations, etc. It's at the forefront of what we do. we're going to deliver an efficient service, let's put the customer first. Additionally, from a service delivery perspective, we've got to think about managing the work that's in the system. And really key to Kanban, this concept of managing work. We manage the work. There's a little phrase that we use. It's manage the work and not the workers. Now, once we've managed the work itself, and I'll explain more about this in a moment, it's then a case of letting the workers self-organise around that work. This is what this principle is all about. And then our final service delivery principle. Basically, we're talking about change. We're talking about doing things better, becoming more efficient with stuff. So our third service delivery principle revolves around the concept of review and improve. In other words, to routinely look at what we do, to routinely get better at stuff. So we're talking about continuous improvement. Now, those are our 6 principles. As I say, 3 relating to change management, 3 relating to service delivery. Clearly, at the heart of Kanban is the Kanban board itself. Let's start sketching this out. So, with a Kanban board, many ways that we can describe this. But often, we will start with some kind of backlog, a pool of ideas, a pool of options. And from these options, we will select some of them to start working on. And when we start working on them, we'll start doing a bit of design work. We might start doing a bit of development work. And once we've built the stuff, we might do some testing. And obviously, once things have been tested and we can release them into the live environment, we consider that the work is done. So Kanban, we've talked about this value of transparency, okay? But all we're doing is we're just mapping out what we're going to be doing. So effectively, all we're doing is building a bit of a visualization, nice and transparently, of the work. And we're talking about the various stages that our work will go through. And we can start illustrating bits of work that are actually in the system. So there'll be a number of things that are potentially in the backlog or the pool of ideas or options. And then we will select work. Hey, this is what we're going to do next. And the work will go through a bit of a design phase, a build or a development phase, and then we'll put some stuff into testing with the idea that we'll eventually start getting stuff done. So we've got the stages of a workflow, nice and transparent. We've got bits of work in the system, again, nice and transparent. We could add more detail. We could start colouring in, adding a bit of colour to specific bits of work. I don't know, maybe this could indicate the type of work, a level of priority, maybe who's working on it. So we've created just a very basic board here. And this leads us nicely into our 6 general practices of Kanban. So 6 general practices that we need to be mindful of. The first of these is this idea of visualization. If you look at what we've done here already, we're already beginning to visualize stuff. We're visualizing the various stages that a piece of work might go through. We're visualizing where perhaps individual pieces of work may be in the system or the flow of work. We're beginning to visualize with color, perhaps level of priority that we've attached to certain pieces of work. It could indicate the type of work. It could, as I say, be indicating who's working on it. So this first practice, visualization. Now, in addition to visualization, thinking of a traffic light system. And what we need to do with this traffic light system is to think about limiting the amount of work that we have in progress. So we have a practice called limiting WIP. WIP, work in progress, the amount of stuff that's in the system. Often we can put too much work into a system and it causes blockages, it causes delays, it causes bottlenecks in the system, which ultimately means unhappy customer. Now this practice of limiting WIP, limiting the amount of work in progress, means that we are pulling the appropriate amounts of work into the system. So onto our board, we could indicate some WIP limits potentially. And again, we're visualizing stuff by doing this. So we could very clearly indicate some limits for the amount of work that we want in a particular column. You can see straight away we're one short here, so it's a cue to pull something into that selected column. Hey, we've got enough in the design phase. Hey, 2 from 2, we've got enough in the dev phase. We've got capacity in test. So the moment one of these pieces of work are done, we can think about pulling it into that column. So what we're doing with these WIP limits, we're creating a pull system, opposite to a push system. A push system, we're pushing stuff in. And all too often when we push more and more into a system, things block up, things clog up. That's not what we want. Now, this idea of limiting WIP, what this is doing, it's helping us with this idea of a nice smooth flow. This word flow that we had in the values. So another of our key practices is this idea of just managing the flow of work. The flow of work in a Kanban system should maximize delivery of value. It should minimize the amount of time that something takes to go through the system. And ideally with this flow, the flow of work through the system, we want it to be as smooth and consistent and predictable as possible. Maybe to help us manage the flow of work through the system. Maybe we could introduce some rules, some policies. Maybe we could introduce a policy in this column. I don't know, for instance, maybe if a piece of work sits in this column for more than 6 months, we get rid of it. We pop it in the bin. It's no longer important, it's no longer relevant. Let's get rid of it. I don't know, maybe we could introduce a policy here into our work selected column. Maybe there's criteria that has to be met that deems a piece of work is ready to pull it from our options and into the selected column. Maybe we could introduce an extra column to our workflow. Maybe we could add in some sort of priority fast track lane. Let's call it an expedite lane. We all know that urgent work crops up, that can't wait, that we need to prioritize. So perhaps we could introduce a priority lane. But again, maybe we could introduce some kind of rule, some kind of criteria in terms of what enables an item of work to enter that priority lane, to take precedence over the other work. But what we're doing here, we're basically introducing policies, okay? This is the 4th of our 6 general practices. This idea of having policies. And importantly, these policies need to be explicit. Really clear guidance on, hey, what does a work item need to have to do to qualify to get into the go faster lane? So we need to make policies, and we need to make policies explicit. This can help manage the flow of work through the system. Our 5th practice, really, really important. That we implement some feedback loops. Feedback loops are a really important part of this system. Very important for any controlled process. Without feedback loops, we don't learn stuff, we don't understand stuff. It doesn't give us the ability to inspect and adapt what we're doing. So feedback, massively important as part of this Kanban system. Our 6th and final practice. There we go, we've got a team of people. We're working together. We've got a nice upward trajectory. So our sixth practice is very much the sense of, well, look, let's improve collaboratively and let's evolve experimentally. In other words, let's get better at doing stuff. At its heart, Kanban is an improvement method. We can relate it back to, well, we start with where we are and then we have some nice gradual, incremental, evolutionary progress, ultimately to make sure that what we're delivering is better for our customers. There's obviously more to Kanban than the values I've introduced you to, the 6 general principles and these 6 general practices. There's a whole bunch of other stuff we could be doing. Data. Data is really important. As we're working, as we're doing stuff, there's a whole bunch of data that we can collect. We can collect a different load of metrics. And we can use these metrics, this data, to help us analyse the current position, to help us understand the current health of our workflow, of our system. And where there's things to improve on, we can then take steps to improve stuff. Now, to help us maybe manage flow, we've talked about the importance of managing flow across the system properly. There's some things we could potentially measure. We could measure maybe the length of time work items are in the whole system, from when they move into selected and we start working on them to when they're finished. We could measure the length of time that an individual work item perhaps stays in an individual part of the workflow. We could measure, I don't know, the age of an individual piece of work. There's a whole bunch of different stuff that we could measure. I don't know, we could maybe measure how many things we're completing and getting finished. But all of this data, really important to help us, as I say, understand the health and to then take steps to improve what we're doing. There's other stuff we can be looking at. This stuff, scaling. Often when we begin with Kanban, we start with an individual team or service, but we can go beyond that. We could go to the left of the workflow, upstream. We could go to the right. We could go downstream. Equally, we could go higher. We could start looking at Kanban from a program level, from a portfolio level. If I had the time, I could talk to you more about the board design. I could talk more specifically about ticket design. But hopefully with this overview, this introduction to Kanban, we've at least whetted the appetite. Any questions, comments? If you'd like to know more, anything else to do with Kanban, please do reach out.